you mentioned power, so that kind of leads into that other topic of power-based training that we wanted to cover. So I know probably in this group we have such a maybe wide range of cyclists in experience and age, and maybe even fitness goals or training goals. I mentioned some might be just perfectly happy to get on the bike and just spin and just move the legs and get the heart rate up a bit or get a bit of a sweat. But for those of us who want to maybe go to another level of training, could we talk about, what is power-based training?
Yeah.
How does that, what is it exactly? Why should we maybe be using that as a...
Well, funny enough, myself and Mel actually spoke about this a short while ago, and we were talking about obviously the transition and what's happened, especially over the last 12 months, where we've got obviously an enormous amount of people now that are training at home, and they've realized how good indoor cycling can be, what it can do for them. They've invested in a Keiser bike or in an indoor cycle bike of some kind. The one thing, though, the detrimental area of that is when you go to a gym or when you go to a studio, you've generally got an instructor in front of you that will stand there, maybe even get off their bike and push you and motivate you to be, stronger than you probably, or push harder than you probably would do if you were on your own. Well, you know what, ladies and gentlemen? You're kind of on your own now. You might have your 4K screen with your platform on there, your cycle class, your instructor, but you know what? Without some kind of knowledge or some kind of recognition or data point to understand exactly how hard you're working or how hard you need to work to achieve what you need to achieve, then it's very difficult to guarantee you're going to get value for money out of that bike. And you're quite right. Some people listen, and I'm a great advocate of it. You want to get on a bike, you want to put your favorite pop tunes on, and you just want to ride. That is fantastic. Get on and do it. But, there are a lot of people out there that want to maximize their results from the time they spend on the bike. They don't want to get on there and think they could have done more. If they've got a 40 minutes or a 30 minutes period they want to ride, they want to really make sure that they're on point. And now going back to power and what actually is power, you can imagine me as an elite cyclist. I used to ride for a team called Team Andalucía Cajas in southern Spain. And they were around, I say, very, very quickly after the millennia. So we were using power meters on our bikes right from the first day. So in other words, we were measuring our functional threshold power level, which generally is the amount of power on average our body can produce for 1 hour's hard work. So in other words, it's a general gauge of how much power our energy systems can produce. On average, it's a functional level. It's not a maximal power. It's not an explosive power. It's 1 hour kind of steady state maximum level is when we're on a bike, which is very important for a cyclist to know for two reasons. The first reason, in training, we're only really going to improve that by knowing where that data point, where our limit is. So it's that limit. Now, the reason that limit is important is because if you constantly work below that limit, then generally you're still going to stay fit, but you're not actually going to improve things at a fast rate. You're not going to be able to improve the way your body produces power. In a race, for example, when I'm climbing a mountain 20 kilometers long, I know by looking at my power meter when I'm pushing too hard, because I know when I'm pushing my threshold level of power, I could last 1 hour because I've tested for it. So I know if I go over that, then my time level is limited if I go into what we call the red zones. But those red zones are really important when we're racing, but also when we're in training, because by training above our functional threshold level, we're increasing the capacity of our body. So within the body, we've got three energy systems. We've got our aerobic energy system, we've got our lactate energy system, and we have our anaerobic energy system. Now, all activity on a bike is aerobic. Whether you're working in any one of those three energy systems, we're utilizing oxygen. But when you're at a very low level or a low intensity, generally we're only using oxygen to produce that power. We're not producing the power by using any of our calories, our glycogen within our body, or actually our ADP, ATP system, our endocrine system. So what we need to understand is where are we and what power are we producing and what energy system are we using to actually create that power. And once we know that, we can specify, like guys like me, profiled classes, which will actually train your aerobic, your lactate and your anaerobic energy system to its kind of potential to actually get you as fit as you possibly could be. Without that knowledge, you're not going to get there. You're not going to understand, and you're certainly not going to be able to record your progress or see your progress when you're riding your bikes.
So could we talk a bit about the FTP tests? Because as I'm getting into it, you're seeing this talked about a lot. There's different platforms that probably have different tests. Does it matter which one you do? Will they all generally give you the same score? If I do one on the M series, like the Keiser has their own M series app, if I do an FTP test on that one, and then 2 weeks later do one on Cyclozone or another, will they generally be the same? But maybe to step back, maybe I don't know if Mel wants to explain this, but yeah, what is the FTP test? Maybe in general, like, what's it going to be like?
If Darren explains what the test is actually is, and then I'll explain about how you then progress your level of fitness. That would probably be the best way of doing it.
Yeah, I think functional threshold power tests actually were created by a pair of sports scientists, a guy called Andrew Coggan and a guy called Hunter Allen, who actually produced the whole theory of power training. This was the very, very late 1980s, early 1990s. And from that stemmed, obviously, the world of power meters, measuring power, et cetera, et cetera. And they created a system based around a single test, which was a 1 hour test on a bike. And this was literally getting on a bike, warming up, and then trying to hit the highest level of power on a bike that you could actually maintain for 1 hour. So it's a case of when you finished your hour, you can hardly get those pedals to go around, anymore at that speed. You kind of, it's done, it's finished. And your average wattage, your average power measured in watts, is your functional threshold power. Now, based around that, they created actually a 7-zone system. Now, we're not going to talk about the 7 zones because I believe the top 2 zones, zone 6 and zone 7, are kind of more for the elite athletes, the people who really want to specify certain amounts of power and types of power that they're producing in certain quantities for certain periods of time. But for the other 5 zones, for anybody riding a bike who's interested in power, they're kind of critical. We've got zone 1 at the bottom, which is actually between 0 and 55% of that FTP figure. So if your FTP was 200, then obviously between 0 and 110 watts is going to be your zone 1. So that is your active recovery zone. So at this level, your body is hardly activating at all. It's just warming up. It's not actually, in any designated training zone. The training really begins actually in zone 2. Zone 2, designated by a blue zone, that is your endurance zone. Or your aerobic zone. You're almost exclusively aerobic at this point. So for people who are doing long endurance events, then that is the zone that generally you will want to be spending your time in, because kind of your time there is unlimited. It's, people doing long marathons, people doing, long cycle rides, charity rides, these 24-hour events will generally find out when they look back and actually measure their power, they spent almost the entire event in zone 2. Because that's where your body can stay. It's still generating enough power to have an effect on the body, but it's quite simple and easy to stay there.
And Darren, really, what percentage would that be around? If you said level 1 was 0 to 55?
56% to 75% of your FTP is purely aerobic. Okay. And that is the blue zone. And these zonal colors are the same throughout all of the flat platforms you'll find on any, cycle training system anywhere in the world. There'll always be these colors because they're based on the original colors kind of laid out by Andrew Coggan and Hunter Allen. Zone 3, which is when you progress past that 75% mark. Now at that point, and these are physiological kind of scientifically proven kind of effects on the human body, your body will now start to engage much more muscle mass at this point. So what it will start to do, it starts to produce lactic acid. And your body has the job then of removing this lactic from the muscles. And this is your lactic energy system, your lactate energy system. And this begins in zone 3. And this is between 75% and 90%. So your lactate energy system begins at that point, and that's when we can start to talk about working on strength, on muscle mass, on, you know, the way the muscles actually work and the way our body deals with lactic acid. So it's a great training zone to be in if you're looking to produce power or create a more powerful body. After 90%, we then get into that zone where we tested for. This is your threshold level zone, zone 4. It's the yellow zone or the slightly light orange zone, depending on what platform you're on. But it's the zone where you start to reach both aerobic and lactate threshold levels of power. So in other words, at this point, you know, you're not going to be able to hold a conversation for very long. You're not going to, you know, you're not going to be comfortable on the bike at this point. It starts to get quite hard work. However, we all know that if you're working on a tested FTP figure, you could hold that zone for 1 hour. I mean, it's gonna really, it's the limit, but you could hold that. So to do a 4 or 5 minute segment in yellow zone is quite within the human body, or, you know, working on your power level, it's quite within your capabilities to do that in a class. So that's really, really, really easy. And for the first part of understanding how power training works is to understand that you should have confidence when you go into that yellow zone, that you can easily do that. It's not going to be comfortable, but you can do it. You can do it. And then anything over, between 90 and 105% of your FTP. Anything over 105% of your FTP, it goes into what we call your red zones. It starts in VO2 max. Then you've got zone 6 and 7 at 120% and 150%. But you know what? In my opinion, for most people riding bikes at this level, anything over that 105%, once you get into the red zones, you're really going to feel the benefit. But the problem you've got is once you hit red, your time there is limited. The higher you go into the red, the shorter time you can spend there. Yeah. So as soon as you get into those red zones, you know, intervals of 1 minute, 1 minute and a half, maybe even 2 minutes, that's going to be really hard. And the most important part of power training is not actually hitting the zones that an instructor may ask you to hit. It's listening to what that instructor says when we want to recover. It's the recovery that's important, not rest. It's recovery. And which zone below zone 4 are we actually going to be asked to recover in? Because the benefits are equally as good in recovery as they are actually hitting those performance intervals. So once you understand how long can we stay in each zone, how long in a class could we stay in each interval, and how long do we have to recover in our blue zones or recover in our green zones, for example, before we can ask you to go down again? That is where the value of a really great instructor is.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, being able to create, when talking about power, if you're going to be asking people to work on a functional threshold power level, it's having an instructor that will push you to the limit, but not push you too far. And it needs an understanding of power and an understanding how that power needs to be put into a class. Hence the reason when I was setting up Cyclozone, you know, I only approached people to teach for me who had the understanding of how to create classes and how to put those intervals, and the importance of recovery as well as the importance of those intervals. Now, we talk about the motivator. We've got him online here, Mr. Thomas, who, if anybody's done any of his classes, will know he is an absolute specialist in getting that over to you. The importance of pushing to those red, but also the importance of bringing it back down again afterwards. Mel's a specialist in insanity classes as well. So I'm going to hand over to Mel now and let him kind of make that relationship between what he does with his insanity hit classes and also what he does in, for example, his challenge classes on the Cyclozone platform. So away you go, Mel. Take it away, sir.